In the fall of 2015, I participated in a residency in Berlin where I was able to explore my ongoing interest in the city that has been dominated by a 20th century of imperialism, war, geopolitical conflict, division, and finally, reunification. I'm interested in failed systems. And in the case of this project, I'm interested in exploring the failed state of the former German Democratic Republic, which is a theme that you'll see consistently from project to project here. I was particularly interested in the visible traces of history that over the lifespan of a divided Germany between the Federal Republic of Germany, or West Germany, and the German Democratic Republic, which was colloquially known as East Germany. Although almost 30 years have passed since the fall of the Berlin Wall, traces of this uneasy relationship are still visible. I'd like to take you on a photographic tour of some of the locations I visited over the course of this project. The first location I'll talk about is the archives of the Ministry for State Security, shortened and commonly known as the Stasi, also known as the State Secret Police, in the former city of East Berlin. The building is served as a processing center and a warehouse for the volumes of documentation related to the surveillance of suspected class enemies. The scale and aesthetic of the interior environments of the archives, with its row upon row of massive rolling shelving units, certainly had for me the atmosphere of a kind of dystopic science fiction film. Over 90,000 official employees worked for the Ministry for State Security, supplemented by 170,000, as they were known as IAMs, or unofficial collaborators, who made up the bulk of the people who were able to collect information. And we're talking about something in the territory of 2.5% of the whole civilian population of East Germany. As you might imagine, many of these collaborators, as they were called, were likely working under duress through coercion, extortion, threat of blackmail, and so forth. The archives are now searchable for citizens in the former GDR, for anyone who feels they may have been subject to surveillance as part of the systematic surveillance. And as you can also see, that part of the archives aren't just written reports, but take visual form as well, in the form of things like photographs, reels of film, magnetic audio recordings, and so forth. The former Ministry for State Security building isn't just currently the house of the archives, but it's also, this large and imposing complex is basically frozen in time. And what you're seeing here are essentially what is now a museum, where the everyday employees and various ministerial offices and meeting rooms are etched in time for us to just browse through and think about. And walking through here, my sense really was how terrifying it must have been to be in these environments where these, I guess, decisions, where I would never get to visit them personally, but these are the environments where decisions were made that would have ruined people's lives, and that were made without any oversight or due process. This was the government. On that note, there is the other side of that story is this infamous prison here. This is called Hohenschönhausen Prison. And this is a secret prison located right in East Berlin neighborhood. The Stasi would bring people here suspected of, again, maybe perhaps wanting to leave the GDR, or perhaps a class enemy, whatever that means, where the rooms and various cells and interrogation rooms and so forth have all been, again, preserved and frozen in time. To serve not just as a reminder of the psychological repression of citizens not knowing who or where or when they may be listened to and eavesdropped upon, but also the physical interrogation, the physical record of what it would have been like to be thrown into the back of a paddy wagon, driven around in circles for hours, and then finally dropped off in this prison. I was interested in imagining that, again, that psychological distress that I felt very much was retained in the atmosphere of this environment, not just in terms of the space, although many of the spaces have been upgraded with wayfinding signage and things like you find, for example, fire extinguishers and things like that obviously weren't there. But to see that the atmosphere is generally the spirit of the atmosphere has been retained. And thinking about what kind of ideology a state would have to have in order to interrogate citizens just contemplating the thought of leaving. I do have to say, though, it wasn't all doom and gloom in the former GDR. This is Spree Park, which is a theme park that was built to commemorate 40 years of socialism in the German Democratic Republic. So it's 40 meters high, it has 40 cars, and as you can see, it still exists. This is a theme park, I should say, sorry, in a stroke of extremely poor timing, this park opened the very same year that the GDR fell. The land, as you might imagine, would have had to, this again was a dense urban park, would have had to have been cleared for various rides, concession stands, roads, and so forth to accommodate the droves of people that would be coming here. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, these Soviet tastes and, I guess, infrastructure just wasn't up to Western European standards. So the park has fallen into a state of disrepair. And the failure to reimagine how this park might be used is evident by the fact that it has just sat vacant for 25 years. And as I guess, an unofficial visitor to the park, as I walked through, I found, again, this neglect is starting we start to see a reclamation of flora and fauna, but illustrates a really sort of terrifying process, which is almost to look at what life would be like in some post-apocalyptic environment. In a similar vein, this is a swimming pool, Panco swimming pool. Panco is a borough in Berlin that is now currently the second largest borough. And this is just a standard Soviet swimming pool, community pool built in the early 1970s. That today is just like Spree Park, just didn't find a place in a reunified city. It's kind of ironic that it is, as you can of course see, that it's been thoroughly abandoned. But it's a kind of a little ironic to see that it's actually in a very wealthy and viable neighborhood right now. So at the time, if you were to say Pankow, people would associate that instantly with East Berlin. And now it seems that Pankow is the kind of a metonym for this failed state. That doesn't even exist anymore. On the other side of the wall, we have, visiting a location in the former West Berlin, is Tempelhof Airport. Although it was built during the Weimar era, it was greatly expanded during the Hitler's rule, Nazi rule, as in this neoclassical style, to be one of the largest buildings in the world. And it was designed to be a showpiece to also commemorate things like large parades and could accommodate literally hundreds of thousands of spectators. An ingeniously designed building. And it wasn't just an airport, it was also designed as there were bomb shelters built underneath, and so many of them are still intact with the untouched graphics that would have been there. They were actually built with glow-in-the-dark paint so that you could use minimal electricity and still have visual cues, which still works. The glow-in-the-dark paint, I can attest. After the fall of the, or I should say during the division of East and West Berlin, this was a critical hub during the Soviet land blockade. So if you imagine West Berlin, it's an island inside of, well behind the Iron Curtain. So when the Soviets decided to blockade any land routes in, this was a critical hub for sustenance of West Berliners at the time. After the reunification of the city, it really started to become kind of obsolete because it wasn't, the airfield, as big and impressive as it is, the runways aren't quite large enough to accommodate modern jets. So in 2005, it was closed permanently, and this glorious, massive structure that was supposed to stand as one of the great symbols of the 1,000-year Reich now just sits disused and abandoned. The next location I wanted to visit is the Teufelsberg. Teufelsberg literally means Devil's Hill. And this hill was built on the rubble of the Second World War. And we're talking about then a very tall, very high elevation and a piece of land well behind the Iron Curtain, as I mentioned. So we have a very strategic location here for Western spying and listening, as it was called. So the NSA, the National Security Agency, built this listening station on the top of this hill. So this would have been a radar station that would have served as a really important outpost of Western intelligence gathering. And it is, as you can see now, has been completely abandoned. And it was abandoned because after the fall of the Iron Curtain, the enemy doesn't exist anymore. The NSA removed all infrastructure, not just the sensitive intelligence gathering material, but all infrastructure, and has more or less stood abandoned for 25 years. Except there are a small community of squatters that live here now and who occupy the space using this campus of this former NSA listening station as a canvas for street art and graffiti. And I can't help but to notice the contrast in usage from this high-tech spy location to a place that doesn't even have basic infrastructure, running water or anything, and is occupied by people living on the margins of contemporary society.